as the Global Health Fellow at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in the USA. She's focused on research and development around tools and strategies to tackle pathogens with epidemic and pandemic potential. Very timely, very relevant. A Rhodes Scholar, she has studied for both a master's in global health and a PhD in clinical medicine at the University of Oxford. She's the perfect person to lead this discussion. She is our moderator, Shmona Simpson. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here with you all today. And I hope to really moderate a fascinating panel, given that we are between the audience and their lunch break. But excited to discuss tech and biotech innovation in a changing healthcare landscape. And I'm here today in my capacity as a founder of a social enterprise called Parity that is really focused on how we can make programs in R&D and life sciences more inclusive and more equitable. And so this is thinking about how we serve marginalized populations, and also really how we can be disruptive using technology to sort of help low and middle income countries leapfrog some of the traditional technical and capacity requirements that may be required to participate in today's innovation landscape. So I'm excited to begin today by introducing today's panel. I'd like to start with Dr. Martin Emanuel Bittner, who is the CEO of Arcturus, the world's first fully automated drug discovery platform, founded in 2016. And he is a medical doctor and has a DPhil in oncology as a Rhodes Scholar. I've been pleased to know Martin for several years now. And you know what's really exciting about his work is that he is automating preclinical drug discovery processes, which I'm really excited to hear more about today, and is a member of several leading cancer research organizations and is a member of the Young Academy of the German National Academy of Sciences. And just to move on to Dr. Elizabeth O'Day, who is the CEO and founder of Olaris, which is a precision medicine company that uses pioneering metabolomics and proprietary machine learning to fundamentally improve how disease is diagnosed and treated. She also earned her PhD from Harvard and an MPhil from chemistry at the University of Cambridge. And just finally, Josh Weiner, who is a senior healthcare strategy executive, leading healthcare strategy at Facebook. And he's been working to transform the industry through advanced analytics and applied machine learning at several organizations, including CVS Health. He also led the analytics team with McKinsey's Journey analytics practice, focusing on go-to-market strategy and operational excellence. So welcome to the panel today. And I'm going to just start off with, for the first round, giving everyone here an opportunity to discuss their technology in detail. And I love that this was in a way that is exciting enough to keep the tech folks in the room really interested, but also is accessible, right? And so I want to just start off with Elizabeth, actually. So let's talk a little bit about what are the applications of precision medicine, specifically the metabolomics approach, and where have you been seeing relevance in the current COVID-19 space?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me and for being a part of this great panel and this great conference. So maybe I'll take a step back and just make sure we're all on the same playing field here, right? What is precision medicine? Precision medicine is moving away from that one-size-fits-all drug treatment approach where everybody gets the same therapy no matter what, to something that's a little bit more tailored for the individual. And precision medicine is not a new term. We've been throwing it around, I think, for the better part of a decade. But I don't think that we've actually been fulfilling on the promise just yet. You know, we're getting there, which is what I want everyone to be hopeful about. But how precision medicine works is it makes use of biomarkers. And these are biological markers that are swimming around in you and I. It could be your DNA, your genes, it could be mRNA, it could be proteins, or it could be metabolites. And it's the sort of the differences in these biomarkers that make, you, and me, and also make you perhaps more susceptible to certain diseases and me others. And that if we were to get the same drug, the same disease and be treated with the same drug, you could have a beautiful outcome, and nothing could happen to me, or the worst, or something even worse. I could have a bad reaction. So there's been a huge tour de force out there to date of people doing sequencing efforts to sequence tumors or sequence different populations to try to find genetic drivers that are underlying disease, and that is a great first step. But I would say that is a first step into a very complicated process, because there's a whole myriad of other factors that are going to influence whether you get a disease or whether a drug works for you. Your diet, your microbiome, the environment you're exposed to, your ethnic background, all of those sorts of things. And so we need to build in more data layers that let us capture that. And so what Olaris does, now getting to your question of what we actually do, we do use metabolomics, where we detect and quantify all the small molecules that swim around in you and I, and we feed them into these machine learning algorithms to see if there are patterns that can distinguish the people who do well on a drug versus those that do not do well on a drug. I think probably sadly we've all experienced this, or either for ourselves or for a loved one, when someone goes to the doctor and they get put on a medication, and then kind of like with that drug comes also they're like, well, like, let's hope that this works. Like, come back if you're not feeling well and we'll try something else. And sadly, there's still a lot of like guesswork in medicine. And I think we can get away with that from some of these like technological innovations. So that's exactly what we do. And we work across different therapeutic areas. Olaris is heavily focused in oncology, breast cancer. We've also got programs in neurodegeneration. We have a product to detect and quantify Parkinson's disease. We have another one that we are developing for immune response. And just really trying to leverage our technology where it can be helpful, because I think like that's the medicine that we all want, right? Where it's like, okay, we know what you have and we know how to optimally treat you, the individual, and move forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was really fascinating. And I'm going to come back to a couple of the points that you raised. Let's just move on to Joshua. Can you give us a bit of an overview about what patient engagement and analytics looks like today? How are you using the application of this sort of metadata, specifically in COVID-19? And where are you finding most relevance, and opportunities for growth?
Yeah, thanks, Shimona. So I'm going to speak to my time leading all patient and member programs at CVS Health. Elizabeth was speaking to clinical applications in precision medicine and sort of the future there as we think about more data. But similarly, additional data has implications for how we close gaps in care and how we support core condition management. So companies like CVS are using electronic medical records, claims data, lab data to understand what sorts of patients what are the various gaps in care, whether it's along the lines of like wellness and screening, and for that particular person, what sorts of other diagnostics they should have, or whether it's specific to care plan compliance, including things like medication adherence or lifestyle modifications that they should be doing. So today and the future looks like bringing all that data together and at the patient level, developing these personalized care plans that can then be shared with physicians as well as other members of the clinical community, payers, pharmacists, parts of the PBM ecosystem, ACOs, IDNs, to try to drive overall improvement in clinical outcomes and well-being, in addition to, and certainly I think complementary to, making sure they're kind of on the right therapeutic regimen, if that's kind of to some extent what Elizabeth is referencing. This is also very much focused on folks that are perhaps not yet in such a severe chronic condition might not yet have cancer or Parkinson's and so forth. But, the half of the world that has hypertension when only a quarter of them know it. Similar story for things like prediabetes. So that's really what I've focused on for most of my career. And as we think about COVID, it's really just amplified all of this. We have, increasing risk of pandemics and viral threats that further create disparity among various groups in the country and in the world, and better understanding who responds well to certain vaccines and what types of populations are most likely to seek treatment and skip treatment or be afraid of certain immunizations and so forth, and building clinical programs around that is really important if we're to move the needle on things like disparity and mortality and broadly clinical outcomes. So that's a little bit about my background, and I look forward to partaking in the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Joshua. And just gonna lastly and not least, Martin, can you talk a little bit about drug discovery automation? What does that look like in real life to help us get a visual? And what have the applications been currently in COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So I think one word up front is that if we look at drug discovery right now, it is a very long, very expensive process. We're looking at 10 years, 12 years, 15 years development times to take a new drug from idea to approval in a process that for a single drug costs in excess of $2 billion. The problem is it's not just very expensive, but it's getting more and more expensive every year. So there is a lot of concern in the industry about this loss of productivity. We don't have many new approvals for new drugs. We have at the same time the desire that this is also been alluding to with precision medicine to have a better fit between more targeted therapeutics and better selected patient populations. So in other words, we actually want to have more drugs and not fewer drugs reaching patients. But at the same time, with these costs and with these high attrition rates, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that. And that is why the whole industry is searching for solutions to make drug discovery faster, to make drug discovery more cost effective, and to increase the chance of success. And one way of doing that is by harnessing the power of technology. And two technologies in particular that are quite synergistic, and both of which receive more and more attention these days, are robotics and artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is something which is of course all over the news for various industries, including drug discovery, where there's companies such as in silico medicine or Atomwise and Benevolent AI that use machine learning and often deep learning technologies to find new drug targets, to generate new chemical matter, to select patients for clinical trials, etc. But all of these trends and all of these decisions are always based on data. And one of the biggest concerns we have is that the data currently powering decision-making in academic research, in biotech research and pharma research, that this data is often flawed. So we know from studies published by pharma companies that 80 to 90% of all of these research findings are wrong, are not reproducible. So we talk about a tiny fraction of research that is actually reproducible, that is actually robust, and that should form the basis for these projects. So what we set out to do with our company, and we're in a group of other companies doing similar things, is to use automation to generate cell biology, molecular biology, biochemistry data that is actually robust, precise, accurate, fully reproducible. In other words, the type of data that scientists can really make use of for their work, instead of just making a best guess. And at the same time, automation is something where the relevance of it has become even more clear during the recent events over the past 12 to 18 months or so, as we've seen countries go into lockdown, as we've seen scientists not being able to go to the labs, And that is something which has stalled and halted research in many countries around the world, which is scary, especially in the middle of a pandemic, where biomedical research is more important than ever. And that is kind of another advantage of using automation and robotics, is robots don't get COVID. So they can work 24/7, and the robots can indeed generate data so that scientists can work remotely even throughout the pandemic. So those are kind of the 2 or 3 angles that I think are quite worth putting some light on in how automation and how robotics first is complementary to AI, which is one of the biggest trends of the century, and second is something which, especially during a pandemic, has particular merit.
Great, thank you so much, Martin. I'm going to pick up on that point, and really think I'd like us to drill down a little bit into how we automate precision, right? And I, in my field, I'm very excited about how we leverage COVID-19 towards a new way of doing business and a new way of solving problems. So in my field, which is, largely centered around, creation of therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics for infectious disease, I've been really excited about the leveraging of mRNA technology. We've been seeing folks using plug and play diagnostics where you're simply switching out sort of one component in order to make a product faster, make it more reproducible. And in that way, we're actually saving time on regulatory approval, because ultimately, the more familiar that our regulators are with some of these processes and the ways in which they're agile enough to be adjusted for different indications, I think this is really, really exciting. This has led us to see, that we can get a vaccine to folks in 9 months, and we've seen this previously with Zika, 12 weeks to a candidate that you can actually give to someone. So I just wonder, in your specific areas, what have you seen in COVID-19 that you think, this is a brand new way of innovating that we can actually apply to other disease indications that have been traditionally unaddressed? And also, are you excited about any specific technologies going forward that you think have an opportunity to be catalytic and disruptive? So I'm just going to go back to Elizabeth on this particular point. What are you excited about? What are you excited about leveraging actually in the post-COVID world towards a new way of doing business? And how are you going to use this specifically in your company to address diseases of unmet need, where perhaps a solution was impossible, but we're now being able to see some light?
Yeah, Shimona, great comments and question all built into one there. And I think I agree with so much of what you said of, we've been able to use in this pandemic, and I hate to draw a silver lining in something that's been so terrible and had, so much loss associated with it, but we have learned a lot. And I think it's causing us to reimagine how we do business, how we develop products, how we, think about healthcare and life sciences. And I am quite hopeful that will lead to, again, a more equitable healthcare ecosystem out there. And so, in the diagnostic space, I think we are seeing sort of like a renaissance right now. So prior to COVID, diagnostics kind of got the short end of the stick in comparison to therapeutics, right? Just from investment and excitement, and even just how we focus on medicine in general. It was more about the treatment, not how do we detect the disease. And I think COVID really showed us that detection and diagnosis and screening and monitoring are really key components to getting a handle on any disease, whether it's an infectious disease or a non-communicable disease or whatever it is, right? And things like that. So I've seen just this dramatic embracing of trying to understand the diagnostic ecosystem. So just as an aside, in addition to my role at Olaris, I'm the co-chair for the World Economic Forum's Biotechnology Council, and we've been trying to launch a global alliance for diagnostics. We set out to do this before COVID, and there were certainly, I would say, supporters of it, but now that COVID is here, like everyone nods their head is like, yes, kind of, we need this for the use cases that you identified, Ebola, Zika, things like that, but also on chronic disease. Like, Josh, your point, like how many patients out there who have hypertension and don't know it, how many patients are on the track for diabetes? And if they just could get access to glucose monitoring, we might be able to implement, different lifestyle changes and prevent them from going down a path of disease. So, I think there's a lot of excitement and interest in the area. And I think your point, Shmona, is spot on, where we've realized we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So what already is existing in the marketplace from tools that we can leverage, that regulators feel comfortable about, that let us solve these problems in a much quicker time scale. And I hope it kind of causes us to reevaluate kind of just this whole process. And this maybe ties into what Martin is doing, is right. We're trying to make everything more efficient. So do we have to do these very long clinical studies? Do we need to do randomized control, double blind, all of that kind of stuff? Can we leverage existing data sets from placebo-controlled groups so that we have that as just a baseline data set, and then we can have our interventional arm, comparison against it. So I think there's a lot of talk and discussion kind of out there. The one piece, and then I'll let the rest of the panel jump in and share their thoughts, that I am most excited about is that I think COVID is causing us to go think of new ways to get directly involved with the patient, right? So, before you had to go to the hospital, you had to wait months, years, whatever, to get seen with the physician that you need to be seen. And with COVID, we've had to reevaluate that. Telehealth is on the boom. There are, mobile health services that go out to communities and to reach people. I've been following all these mobile clinical trial things, that are going on. And I'm hoping that will actually kind of help with some of the access that's been a barrier to people of different backgrounds, kind of being able to kind of engage in healthcare and in biotech. So I think these new innovations to either go out and get samples or talk to or understand the needs of the patients and then bring them into kind of the solution development are going to be big steps.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to come to accessibility in a moment. Can I just drill down a little bit deeper into one of the specifically around this precision piece? You mentioned that you have a number of disease indications. So this could, be from inflammation to cancer, specifically the technology that you've seen in the precision space for COVID. Are there disease indications that you think that we have not addressed substantially prior to now, that COVID has opened up sort of a new gateway for us to attack? I don't know if this is in the areas of cancer specifically, but I'd be really interested in what, the biomarker, sort of the dissemination of deep sequencing, the dissemination of, us thinking more about precision medicine. What are you thinking about this in the cancer space, for example, or,
So, I don't know, there's multiple ways that I want to answer this, so I'm trying to think of the most efficient. But so for COVID, I think actually we're still realizing we need data, to figure out what's going on, how long immunity lasts, how long immunity lasts in, different people, why certain people have, are asymptomatic and why others have sort of severe cases. And we don't know yet, right? And we don't know because we don't have the data. And I think we're seeing now sort of efforts sort of mushrooming across the globe to develop more centralized, federated systems so that we can aggregate that data, because that's been a huge problem in medicine in general, right? Certain people have some data set and they guard it because it's worth a lot, and then others have others. And then it limits our learnings. And I think COVID really forced people to say hey, we really got to think of creative ways that we can sort of share and aggregate this data. And I'm hoping that those same lessons kind of, again, get translated into other diseases. I think like infectious disease is an area too that has not got as much attention as oncology, as some other areas. But COVID again showed us we got to double down and look at this. Antibacterials as well are an area that has been completely underfunded, now I think there's robust innovation kind of happening in this area, because now we've seen COVID's a virus, but imagine we got a super bug that just, came and none of our antibiotics worked. Like, what would we be able to do? And how could we understand who existing antibiotics work for, when they should be used, like the timeline to sequence them, so that we can kind of make the best use of the therapies we have out there. And all of this, again, data driven. And I think, the data sets are not always there. And so now, again, it can't happen by one company or even one country. It has to be a multi-stakeholder approach kind of coming together. So I know the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing a great effort in this across all kinds of diseases, but specifically in infectious disease, to kind of understand who are the patients at risk, what are the treatments there? Do they work for actually that intended patient population and not, So I think, again, I'm hopeful, because it's really highlighted the pain points. The good news is we have all the technology to do this. The problem is we don't have the data to necessarily create the innovation, right? So the data has to come first, and that's where we're at.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think this is a great segue into some of Joshua's work on the specific data piece, right? So how can we think more about leveraging, historic and the current data that we've been seeing in COVID-19 towards new ways of working? So, Josh, to Elizabeth's point, certainly in the industry, there's a lack of data sharing, right? And this is it's traditionally been seen as a barrier, just because industry players don't share data. You may not have that problem in some of the industries that you're working in, right? At the major pharmacy level, at the level of, sort of global entities that actually have a tremendous amount of data on how we operate, indications we may have, how frequently we're coming in for services. It's got a predictive potential about it. And so I wonder, what are you excited about in the post-COVID world? And I just love your imagination here on what you think is possible going forward in terms of how we use previously collected data towards being more precise and really helping in a new way, serving in a new way, and innovating differently.
Yeah, great question. And I wish it was true that data sharing and data interoperability wasn't a problem at some level of the healthcare ecosystem. But unfortunately, it's probably one of the biggest challenges in care delivery, particularly in the US. But there are a couple things that excite me. One is there is some new healthcare interoperability regulation that has been approved and is coming online in the next couple years that is going to hopefully make a big dent in more sharing of electronic medical records in an interoperable way that can then be connected with claims and address really all of the problems that the group on the panel here is discussing. That's one piece. The other is I'm really excited about connected devices. I'm really excited about the potential for things like continuous glucose monitors and all of these wearables and I don't know, broadly speaking, kind of this riffing on sort of the Internet of Things play to be able to create new biomarkers and new data sets or biomarkers in the most informal sense that lift all ships. I've seen some really I've seen some really interesting research on non-invasive blood pressure monitoring, continuous passive non-invasive blood pressure monitoring. Wow, I mean, that would be life-changing as we think about kind of hypertension and the fact that getting 2 blood pressure measurements a year in a doctor's office when it's already proven that white coat hypertension is a thing. And there's kind of the issues Elizabeth is talking about, where because you only have those 2 measurements, the guidelines around medication and medication titration are so inefficient for the management of cardiovascular disease is something that really excites me. And then, I mean, I was working with a company that has a lot of devices in the home. And, there's kind of this new set of biomarkers on the horizon, when you go to sleep and when you get out of bed, your gait, and, kind of if all of a sudden you seem to be walking a little bit differently. Some consumer technologies have rolled out what are at times can perhaps be a little bit creepy kind of programs that, interpret kind of like your voice, like Amazon in particular rolled out a wearable and it's telling you your mood and or at least trying to tell you, like, by interpreting your speech, how you feel throughout the day. I mean, I just think that data is the rate limiting factor, and over the next couple of years, we're going to get better at sharing and integrating the data that already exists. Not so much the molecular level data that kind of is of the most importance to like Elizabeth and Martin, at least to some extent, but electronic medical records and claims data. And then I think also we are going to be collecting new data from these devices that are hopefully 24/7 and on humans, and allow us to explore things like better titration of medication and nocturnal dosing and early detection of diseases, because, we're getting subtle new clinical indicators through like functional analysis or gait or speech or facial expression. I work at Facebook. Facebook has a lot of technology and virtual reality. Speculative here, but, there's a lot of possibility with eye tracking. And the world and the use of eye tracking for broad-based neurological disorder diagnoses, and to get a lot smarter about the sort of things that today only happen for wealthy people when they go and see specialists one time a year at best. Can we democratize that, decentralize it, bring it to everyone, and get those new data sets to lift all these ships are the things that excite me.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua. That was very illuminating. And just a note, my very last question is going to be on equity, disruptive tech, and particularly low middle income countries. So Martin, I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to the earlier question about what you're excited about in the area of drug discovery automation. And I'd love if you could speak to speed and safety in the post-COVID world. What are you seeing in terms of trends, and how could this be disruptive? Hopefully that'll segue us into our discussion on equity.
Absolutely. So I think as I said, also the key concern within drug discovery is very much this problem that we have with speed and quality. Things take too long and they're too expensive, and kind of the quality of the data that should allow us to progress new drugs to patients is often questionable. So in other words, any endeavor that helps us to address these issues, speed, quality, cost, is going to have a massive impact. That can happen in clinical trials, where, for example, virtual clinical trials, decentralized trial models, clinical trials where patients record their own measures at home. All of these things could have a tremendous impact on the clinical development side of new drugs. And I think the counterpart in the preclinical side and laboratory side is this trend towards automation, which is a trend that allows the scientists, who up until now spend 6, 7, 8 hours every day with manual experimentation, it allows these scientists to spend the same amount of time thinking, hypothesizing, building new ideas, driving their projects forward intellectually, as opposed to remembering whether kind of in the 96 well plate they were trying to pipette into, they forgot kind of row A or row B. And then they will have to redo the whole experiment again. So in other words, the way that technology can really have an impact on the early stages of discovery is not just by bringing the precision and accuracy that come from automated experimentation, but it is very much about liberating the scientists to spend their time on higher value activities. Because I think if you ask someone on the street, what is a scientist supposed to be doing, work with their hands or think, most people would agree that thinking is kind of what a scientist is supposed to be doing. And all of these people are incredibly smart, incredibly bright, and they've spent 10, 15, 20 years understanding cancer biology, understanding many different physiological and pathophysiological processes. Using them to pipette is just a waste of resources. And I think that is even more the case when we have countries, for example, low and middle income countries, where oftentimes we have these scientists who are very, very well trained and who have a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight. And then kind of the next step, which is having access to research capabilities, suddenly becomes the bottleneck. And I think in this case, kind of the parallel would be kind of this very scary thought, well, what if kind of the person who would win the next Nobel Prize for medicine just happened to be born in a country where there's no biomedical laboratory infrastructure, or not to the same degree that, for example, the Boston ecosystem or the London ecosystem or the Oxford ecosystem has them on offer. And that is where I think the idea of equity and equality comes in, and with the idea that kind of to us, kind of, and to myself is very close to my heart, which is saying that the same way that AWS, for example, makes it possible for anyone in the world to start a software company, regardless of access to server rooms, the very same way companies like Arcturus can make it possible for researchers all around the world to run high-quality experiments on very expensive equipment without having to ever step into a lab. But instead, they can be at home, they can develop their ideas, and they can leave kind of the execution of the actual experiment in the hands of a robot.
Martin, that was... Oh, sorry, somebody needs to mute. Thank you. Okay, so I think that was just incredibly insightful. And I was really excited by your term about liberating scientists, which I feel like we can apply to so many different trains of thought, which brought me back to all the PhD horror of spending too much time in the lab. So I'm really excited about this, and maybe want to just, in the interest of time, give you and Elizabeth like quick 30 seconds on this particular piece around innovation equality, right? Because what your platforms actually offer us is a way to be incredibly disruptive with tech and sort of democratize the capability to folks who may not have previously had access. And this is the crucial, for me, learning post-COVID, is that, we have seen a disproportionate impact, whether it's in sort of high income countries on, the marginalized populations, BIPOC communities, people who are just underserved in every single way, in every single healthcare indication. And it really shows us that we need to bring healthcare to the hands of the people in order to really disrupt the system as it stands, and really radically improve equitable outcomes. And this is something that we can source sort of all over the world. We can think about this globally, right? For countries who have often been kept out of the gate in some ways due to infrastructure, due to trade, due to politics in the innovation space. So if you could both just give me a quick 30 seconds on that term of liberation and innovation, right? And how you see your particular companies offering us a new way forward. And then I think we can close.
Martin, you want to go first, or you want me to jump in? Oh.
I'll take Elizabeth first, since Martin just had to give me a really long answer. Go for it.
Push it to him. No. Well, I'm humbled by the idea that our technology could be involved in liberation. I will say what drives me is that our technology could be involved in the democratization of medicine and promoting a more equitable, healthcare future. And I think this this can happen on like a macro level and more individual level. So already, like work that I do at Alaris or through my work at the World Economic Forum, we're engaging with political leaders to try to understand what are the most pressing health issues in your country, and how can we use all the existing technology that exists out there, put it in the appropriate cultural context, and then leapfrog forward to develop a solution for you. So, for example, there's an effort in Rwanda that I'm involved with to help get BRCA1 testing, out to the population there. It's disproportionately higher in those groups, and just because of lack of infrastructure, they don't have sequencing efforts, right? They don't have PCR like available like that we do here, right? So how can we build centers, get access to the technology, train people, and go out to the community and also do the very important part of education, right? That this is a problem. Here's like a solution that exists. There's no stigma associated with it. It's going to help you live better, and everything like that. And so that can happen on a country level, as well as individuals, right? And this is again what we're seeing with COVID, right? Like, is it socioeconomic factors that are causing, marginalized people to be more affected by this? Probably rightly so, or certainly a big part of it. But are there other factors that we don't understand, about their background, their immune response, X, Y, and Z, that are letting us are creating these gaps in treatment? And so again, I think by going to the patients, going to the populations, we can take all this existing technology and then use it to leapfrog to develop innovative solutions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And just in the interest of time, Martin, last word on this, liberating innovation and sort of what you envision as a new way forward and democratizing some of this technology.
I think you perfectly summarized kind of my own views on this. That I think kind of what we really kind of have in front of us is a very unique possibility of using different technologies, the ones that Josh mentioned, the ones that Liz has been referring to, the ones we ourselves work on, to really kind of create an environment, create an ecosystem where innovation can grow and prosper regardless where it comes from, and can benefit patients regardless where they are. And that's something I feel very much motivated by.
Great. Thank you so much to this panel. I found the discussion pretty fascinating. And I just want to thank you all for your time. And I'm just going to hand over back to Terry Carell. Hopefully we hadn't eaten folks' lunch break too much, but thank you so much for being here today, all of you.
Thank you so very much, Shimona. Very, very kind consideration. No, that discussion that you had a while ago was brilliant. I thought you did a fantastic job as a moderator, asking very poignant questions and getting those very insightful answers. Now, earlier, I do owe you an apology though, Shimona. Earlier, we had mentioned your role at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which was something that you did prior to founding and of course being the managing director of your business right now, your entity, which is Parity. And what made you perfect for this is that your business at Parity really centers around dealing with marginalized populations and using innovative healthcare delivery modalities to build these communities. So again, thank you so very much for that. And I can see your passion and your love for what you do and why you are so integral in making this particular panel discussion so successful. So thank you, and continue the fantastic work in the marginalized communities. So my takeaways from that panel discussion, definitely, we were talking about tech and the importance of innovation. And what I keep on hearing in all of the different panel discussions is that innovation and tech and all of the discussion means nothing if we're not going to try to achieve equity.